Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Thrive Innovation Series here in Silicon Valley. I'm John Hartnett, CEO and founder of SVG Ventures and Thrive, and I'm delighted to be joined here today by two of the top leaders in the livestock industry, Bill Evans, CEO of the National Pork Board, and Joe Weber, Executive Vice President of Smithfield. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Hope you're keeping well, and I hope everybody's keeping well through these challenging times. We've all experienced the critical importance of the food supply chain, starting in the field through the complex supply chain of processing, logistics, and retail, and ending up with food on our tables. There's no other supply chain, as we've all experienced, as important as the one that puts food on our family table. And today's speakers have been front and center delivering food to our tables while navigating through the COVID challenges. Next slide, Jess. Earlier this year, we launched the Thrive Innovation Series to focus on the future of the food supply chain and emerging technology trends across the supply chain. Every month, we will chat with key leaders, CEOs, founders, and innovators who are shaping the future of food and agriculture. Earlier this month, we were honored to speak with USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue, and we have an incredible lineup coming up in July where we have the CEO of Trimble, Rob Painter, and then in July 23rd, we have the founders of Plenty, the vertical farm company, leading the way, speaking with Matt Bernard and Nate Story. And on August 20th, we'll have Bob Ryder, the head of R&D for Bayer. So make sure you register now. Next slide, we've got our Thrive Demo Day coming up on September 24th. This is in partnership with Forbes. We normally lead this or hold this at the Forbes Ag Tech Summit in Salinas in California. Unfortunately, we had to postpone it due to the pandemic, so we're going to host it on a webinar style series. We selected 13 amazing agri-food startups from around the world earlier this year, and they have just completed a 4-month program, which commenced at our seed camp in February, and they will pitch live on the 24th, so you can tune in to that then. Next slide, Jess. I'd like to thank our corporate partners, some of the biggest names in the industry, and we're delighted to be working with them to accelerate their innovation and also their growth strategies. And delighted to have the Pork Board here today that was a supporter and partner of ours for the last 2 years. Next slide. So you can see we have quite a large audience today. I think we've over 400 people that registered. And as you can see, from about 30 different countries, from Australia, must be pretty late there right now. And obviously across Europe and right across the United States. And we have quite a mix of folks from different backgrounds. We've about 27% of our audience from a government, education, and research perspective. About 18% of the audience corporate players in the innovation and the agriculture sector. And then obviously we have a lot of startups. We've got early stage startups and later stage startups combined with investors. So, and then obviously we've got our farmers and growers. About 8% of our audience are tuning in from the field, literally, I hope. So next slide. We're going to launch a live poll this morning, and we'll review the results during our Q&A. And you should be able to see the poll kind of pop up now. There's 3 questions, there, and you can scroll up to be able to see the 3 different questions. One is around the supply chain disruptions that have happened over the course of COVID. Another question is around the supply chain improvements that can be made, and then also what accelerated trends have happened, due to the COVID outbreak. Next slide. So delighted to have these 2 esteemed gentlemen here with us today, and Bill and Joe, thank you for being here. And before we kick off to give an intro on both sides, I just wanted to welcome you. And how are you doing through the current pandemic, and any kind of personal silver linings that you've experienced during the lockdown while you were there? Maybe Bill?
Sure. Thank you very much, John, and thanks for the opportunity. I'd say the silver lining, our youngest daughter is a sophomore in college. And so when the colleges were closed, she came back home to live with us. So my wife and I thought we were empty nesters for a little bit, and we're right back in the swing of things. But getting closer to family had a real upside. So that was a silver lining, John.
Excellent. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I'd say exactly the same for us. I had two daughters out of the house, and they've been back home for the most part, working from home, and one just graduated from college and fortunately has a job. But be able to spend time with them at the dinner table, at home. I think for all families, the time at home has probably been important, especially those times, having meals together and going for walks and doing things together as families.
Yeah, that's great. I totally agree. We've had the same, and I think the two other things that happen is you're either eating or drinking more, or you're working out more as well. So you're either getting super fit or putting on the pounds. Hopefully the first one. So maybe if we get moving on to our first guest, Bill. We met Bill at the Pork Board in 2018, where we were engaged to seek out key innovation solutions for the swine industry. And last year, we were delighted to host the first Swine Innovation Summit in Indianapolis together, which was a key initiative by the National Pork Board. And for those of you who may be not as familiar with the Pork Board, the Congress created the Pork Checkoff as part of the Pork Promotion, Research, and Consumer Information Act in 1985. So been around since 1986 and basically being a major player, ensuring the food safety right through the pork industry. And Bill, delighted to have Bill here, and I'm also delighted to say that on Bill's family side, he's got Irish connections as well. So I know on his mother's side, I was delighted to hear that. And I think the first thing to say about Bill is that he's a fourth generation farmer. And I think one of the things that really has been able to excel his understanding of the industry is just having that experience, through the years. Bill is CEO of the National Pork Board based in Iowa. Before that, he worked at DuPont Pioneer as a global industry relations lead and commercial unit lead. And he holds a Juris Doctorate from Drake University Law School, where he was the Opperman Scholar. So we're dealing with some serious scholars here this morning. So I'll hand it over to Bill to give us an overview of what's happening at the National Pork Board.
Thank you very much, John, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everyone watching around the world. A real pleasure, John, for you to invite us to be part of the Thrive series here this week. I'm going to give you about 4 slides that are going to walk you through just a little bit about the Pork Checkoff background. So Jess, if you could advance one. Really, we're responsible, and many of our producers are responsible for that whole supply chain. So many of the people we represent are also crop farmers, and that feed then goes into the hogs, which then goes into the processors, distributors, packing plants. And then we're also deeply connected with retail and food service with our domestic marketing team. And we also have responsibility then for marketing pork as a brand to consumers, not only in the United States, but also internationally. So on the next slide, a little bit about us. There are about 60,000 pork producers in the United States of various sizes. We export about 30% of our production. So exports are a critically important part and growing part of our business. Last year, pork was the #1 most consumed meat protein worldwide. I think most people find that very surprising, but it's true. And when you look on the right-hand side of the graph, you recognize that pork represents less than 0.3% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And John, I know we'll be talking about that a little bit later along with Joe. One thing we noticed during the COVID pandemic is that our pork sales have tripled. And our big footprint is generally I would say in the grocery aisle. And so that really helped us out there. And then I think the other good news, in spite of all the struggles we've had as a nation and as a world dealing with the pandemic and the food supply chain, our polling that we conduct weekly indicates that 90% of consumers are still confident in the U.S. pork and our pork system, despite all the challenges we've had up and down the supply chain. So in the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about something, why we're involved with Thrive and pleased to be part of that. We've got some new efforts here at the Port Checkoff, as John had indicated. It's working on supply chain innovation. So 89% of consumers say it's going to be important for us to take a step back and figure out how we fix some of the problems in the supply chain. And 73% of consumers are currently indicating that, you know what, if it's going to cost a little bit more money, but we end up getting a better system, they'll be supportive of that. If you click forward, Jess, you look at the next piece is solutions, because that's what Thrive Ag and this whole effort today is about, is how do we find people to help us with solutions, whether it's data technology or just getting better information on the package around where pork comes from. That's all equally important. And if you click one last time, I think a couple of examples we have here regarding supply chain innovation. The National Pork Board and the pork producers paid for the creation of a new blockchain traceability pilot, where we looked at sustainably tracking our sustainability metrics from the farm all the way through the production system and on out to the consumer. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about sustainability innovation. And 25% of consumers have, I'd say, you know, the perception that ag is perhaps bad for the environment. And one of the things we're trying to do is rectify that concern and provide them with the facts. And 2 out of 3 consumers regularly sometimes think about the environmental footprint when they're thinking about getting their food. If you click forward, Jess, we look at what are possible solutions there, very similar. Where there's a need for us to innovate in this sector if we're going to meet the demands of the consumer post-COVID. And then the next slide forward is the carbon footprint calculator. Our producers paid for out of their own pockets the development of this calculator that's allowing farmers to actually ascertain what's their essentially their greenhouse gas footprint, their energy, water, and animal footprint. And we're able to now put together some metrics to verify that. Because as Joe will attest to later, if you're issuing a sustainability report for a company, you need to make sure that it's verifiable. On the next slide, Jess, I really kind of want to end on our We Care ethical principles. 12 years ago, the U.S. pork producers sat down collectively through their leadership and said, we know what we're against, but what are we for? And it really changed the mindset of U.S. pork producers to say, we're going to be proud about what we're really in favor of and what we believe in as principles. And you can see their food safety, environment, taking care of people, taking care of the animals, safeguarding public health, and being part of the community. So that's really a little bit about our background, John, and turn it back to you.
That's great, Bill. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it's pretty incredible stuff, the scope and the work that you're doing. So well done on that. And maybe I'll move to Joe. And I think Smithfield Foods is a well-known name around the world. And just to kind of frame it up for Joe, I don't want to steal his thunder. But Smithfield Food is a US-based global food company, the world's largest pork producer and hog producer. It's a 15 billion revenue, and it's over 80 years in the industry. And I'm sure you're very familiar, not just with the name of Smithfield, but you know all the major brands that are under this incredible company. I was really struck by the vision of the company. You know, with our culture of responsibility, operational excellence, and innovation, we will be the most trusted food and protein company as we sustainably feed the world, our people around the world. So really, you know, thoughtful, big focus and vision in terms of what you're doing. Joe, you're, you know, I hate using the word veteran because you're too young to be a veteran. But, you know, 26 years at Smithfield in 1994, after receiving his MBA from the College of William and Mary, Joe went to work for Smithfield Packaging in Virginia as product manager and salesperson in fresh meat. And now he's Executive Vice President of Growth and Emerging Business. He oversees the company's growth initiatives and offers strategic leadership for emerging businesses. You've really come all the way through the whole process there, Joe, and really looking forward to your overview.
Yeah, thank you, John. And you talked a lot about who Smithfield is and addressed a lot of what I was going to talk about in terms of Smithfield. So if you get into the presentation here, just real quick, this is who Smithfield is. We operate in 5 countries, the biggest footprint being in the United States, but worldwide, 55,000 employees between the U.S., Poland, Romania, Mexico, and some operations in the UK. 64 total facilities, 749 company-owned farms, and there's over 3,200 contract family farmers that are part of our system, just on the farming side alone. This page here talks a little bit. We are number 1 in hog production across the world. We are number 1 in pork. We're the largest pork processor across the world. In terms of value-added meats, packaged meats, we're the largest in the U.S. And of course, we're a top supplier in the U.S. to food service, retail, and export channels as well. On the next page, these are our guiding principles. This is what we live by: responsibility, operational excellence, and innovation. That ROI and that acronym is, there's got to be a return to investment, but we have to be responsible for everything we do. We strive every day for efficiency and operational excellence, and innovation's part of our DNA. We got to continue to make it part of our DNA. And then as we think about innovation on the next page, this is really what drives us every day, is our sustainability platform. Those 5 legs of our sustainability in terms of animal care, the environment, food safety and quality, communities, and people. That drives us every day. That drives a big part of our innovation, and there's got to be value creation there, but we continue to find ways to find win-wins to improve our sustainability and improve our ROI principles every day. Tells you a little bit about Smithfield, and I'll turn it back to you, John.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Bill. Joe, I mean, obviously 55,000 people around the world, a pretty major supply chain. And I'm sure, these last 3 months have been quite challenging. And I think we've all experienced, the challenges around the supply chain. What would you say are kind of the biggest learnings that, that you've seen, and where do you kind of see that impacting the future? And maybe if you want to talk a little bit about, the consumer trends that you're seeing accelerated due to COVID. Yeah,
we sure can. Obviously this COVID-19, the coronavirus, has been the biggest deal in the last 3 to 4 months. It's been a big issue to our business and all of food business. You asked about some of the learnings. I think we all knew this, but at the end of the day, how tight our food supply chain really is. It's not just a just-in-time, it's a really just-in-time supply chain. And across the entire system, we've got a very tight supply chain. And I think as a society, we've got to think about that going forward and how we adapt to that. We got to be prepared for crises. And I think the good thing coming through this is we'll all be stronger. The people will be stronger. Corporations will be stronger. Relationships with everybody in the system will be stronger. But we've got to prepare for any kind of crisis. And we're not over the COVID by any stretch of the imagination. We got to continue to keep people safe and provide food. And this is going to go on for a while, but we got to continue to do that. As it relates to trends, you asked a little bit about trends. There's no doubt that some of these trends are being pushed forward. If you think about, how we go to market and our marketing trends, digital has been pushed forward quite quickly. If you think about how consumers have really adapted to either pick up at the store or at the restaurant, home delivery from a store or a restaurant, or even, that last mile e-commerce, that trend has been pushed forward greatly. You're also seeing trends around health and wellness. I think our consumers have really focused on that, and I think they'll continue to focus on that even after COVID might no longer be an issue. Some of these other areas, health and wellness, a focus on fresh. You're seeing a lot more interest in fresh products, fresh proteins, as opposed to value added. Maybe consumers have more time, so they have more time to prepare. And there's been a focus on trying alternative products, including plant-based proteins. Consumers have gone out there and tried different types of products, and so there's a little bit of trend there. I would say, just to finish, there are some trends that maybe have gotten pushed back a little bit. Sustainability around packaging, unfortunately, I think has gotten pushed back a little bit. Hopefully we'll get past that when COVID's over. But you're seeing people less concerned about packaging, and we got to find solutions around that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Joe. That's really interesting. I wasn't aware of the packaging kind of pullback, and it's pretty obvious to kind of see some of these consumer trends kind of jump forward. I mean, on the consumer trends, Bill, I know you've kind of focused a lot as an organization on the consumer that you serve, and the consumer is changing rapidly. 50% of the world's population is either Gen Z or millennial. And people are focused more on eating healthily. There's new proteins, plant-based proteins coming onto the market. And that's obviously kind of changing, the world, not just for the pork industry, but right across, the entire food supply chain. How's this impacting, the industry today? And what do you look forward as, how this is going to impact the future? And then maybe, talk to us a little bit about pork as a brand, as well as part of this.
Well, thanks, John, and certainly echo Joe's observations. That mirrors what we've seen more, broadly across the U.S. pork production industry and consumers. I'd say that the number one takeaway on the consumer side is people really understood what's real. You get back to first principles, and when people realized that they were going to be sheltering at home, they needed to feed themselves and their families. The restaurants were closing, but the grocery stores remained open. What you saw both in the U.S. as well as around the world is people immediately trying to find things that were familiar, were fresh, and were things that they knew were going to provide them protein for who knows how long before they'd be able to get back to the grocery store or what would be available. I think that really presents an opportunity for us in agriculture, John. We've got the public's attention. Often here in the United States, or certainly maybe in some of the more industrialized countries, we kind of take food for granted. It's always there. It's ever present. It's in the cupboard. It's in the refrigerator. It's in the freezer. It's in the store. It's in the restaurant. Food is omnipresent. And then suddenly, if you think about it from the terms of Maslow's hierarchy, we get down to some really base principles at the bottom of that triangle. And it's about food, clothing, shelter, health of myself and my family. And I think it presents a real opportunity. What we've done on behalf of the nation's pork producers is really, as Joe indicated, aggressively ramped up our digital engagement. We've had a longstanding partnership with Google and YouTube that's been very successful working with content creators. We immediately pivoted a lot of our marketing and got just basic information to the Gen Z and the millennials that suddenly have a pork loin or a pork roast or a ham and weren't quite sure how to cook it. What do I do with this?
Yeah.
And then suddenly, I got to watch my budget. So how do I cook once and eat 3 times? The old-fashioned idea of leftovers, and what do we do with them? And so we've spent a lot of time just trying to meet the consumer where they're at. You look up a Google search term. Okay, they're asking a question about how do I cook a pork chop? Well, let's give them some information, some video on how to do it and do it successfully.
That's excellent. I think I remember last year at the Swine Innovation Summit, I was surprised but very impressed that I think the first speaker up there was a guy from Google talking about the vloggers, and I was saying, wow, I can't believe these hog farmers are into vlogging. So, the industry is obviously, continues to kind of deal with the environmental challenges as we all do, across the world. And I think maybe livestock kind of gets a tough rap from times. And I don't think maybe people really understand fully about some of the proactive measures that has taken place, both, what you're doing, Joe, at Smithfield. I was pretty impressed when I read your 2019 Sustainability Impact Report. Can you share a little bit about the findings of that and maybe what has driven that, for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the fact that you referenced that. We did just release our 2019 Smithfield Food Sustainability Report. We've been doing that report for a very, very long time. I don't know the exact date we started that, but it's all about those core principles that I talked earlier, and those principles that we live by. And it's in a very important part of what we do, and it drives a lot of our innovation. And yeah, I can't talk about all the great things going on because there's a tremendous amount of great things in there. And I encourage people to get online at smithfieldfoods.com/sustainability and take a look at it. But one of the most exciting things is our commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the year 2025. And one of the things that's kind of fun that we're doing there is we've covered some of these hog lagoons and taking hog waste, digesting it, and making renewable energy and natural gas and selling it back into the pipelines. And we're doing that across 4 or 5 different states, and it's an exciting project, and it's all part of those sustainability initiatives that we're talking about.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. And Bill, I heard the term carbon neutral pig, from you, and you mentioned a little bit about the carbon footprint calculator. Do you want to maybe just expand on that a little bit and tell us how that works and what exactly is being the impact?
Sure, John. And again, we're a producer-owned and led organization, so every dollar that we have to spend is coming out of a producer's pocket to advance the industry. And a number of years ago, we worked with the University of Arkansas and Dr. Marty Matlock down there in their sustainability center and said, we really need to get some solid metrics that are verifiable that we can put out there in the industry. Well, in the first place you start is, well, how do we measure these things? And so we created the calculator, and we're in the process of doing some major upgrades to that now to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. And through that process, you start to come across, some broader numbers. I alluded to one earlier. First off, livestock agriculture accounts for about 9% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. I think that surprises a lot of people that we're not the demon in the middle of this, but we've got a role to play. And then when you get into the pork industry, we're about 0.3% of greenhouse gas emissions. So we're already pretty close to that neutral spot. And so we've sat down with our board of directors, a 15 farmer member board, and said, let's head for the carbon neutral pig, and let's figure out how we do that. And to make that happen, John, we've also partnered with the National Corn Growers Association and the United Soybean Board here in the United States, because ultimately, over about 60% of our footprint actually comes from the feed that we produce. And so I think as Joe would agree with me, this is all part of a system, and everybody's got to do their part if we're going to change the end result and be able to put something on a package label for a consumer.
Okay. Well, thank you, Bill. And in terms of innovation, I mean, we had Secretary Perdue on a couple of weeks ago, and there's a big focus on innovation and the innovation imperative that's being kind of driven. And I know obviously innovation is kind of deep in your worlds as well. I mean, what are some of maybe the top initiatives that maybe you would talk to in your organization? Maybe I'll start with Joe first, and maybe as you look forward for the next 3 to 5 years, what do you think will be kind of one of the biggest technologies that would make the biggest impact for your industry?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot, and I don't know that I could pick out a very specific innovation, but I would point to our sustainability initiatives. I think a lot of our innovation is going to be around that, around people, how we set up facilities, how we deal with, making sure that we've got a great environment. Around animal care, continue to be around animal care, our environmental objectives around food safety and quality. And how we interact with communities. And there's, maybe you could say there's less innovation around there, but those sustainability pillars are going to be very important to how we focus on innovation. And there's always value creation there. The more we can be efficient, that's about operational excellence, which is one of our guiding principles. So that innovation is going to be centered largely around those sustainability initiatives. And if you think about COVID-19, our only focus is keeping people safe and providing food. And so that's been our focus as of late.
Yeah. Bill?
I certainly agree with Joe, and I'd go back to the industry's we care principles and those 6 things I outlined briefly earlier. Our board is firmly committed to supporting innovation in all of those spaces, and so we've dramatically reduced antibiotics. Well, in order to do that, we've had to think of different ways of biologicals or different ways that we manage our animals in order to move the needle in that direction. Our progress in the environmental side is worth touting. We did a longitudinal study, look back over the past 50 years. And over the past 50 years, U.S. pork producers have reduced the amount of land necessary to produce a pound of pork by 75%. We reduced the amount of water that we're using in the industry by 25%. And we've reduced our energy and our greenhouse gas emissions by an additional 7%. And so those things happen just naturally by producers are innovative by nature. And I think what I would see going forward is we're going to continue to strive to have innovation at the farm level. Joe is intimately involved in the innovation that will be happening in the packing industry. And I'd say our ability to actually listen to consumers and understand what they really want will provide consumers what they desire, what they demand. And we getting those market signals back to us is going to be incredibly important. And so I think that traceability, as I alluded to earlier, through blockchain and the like, is also going to be incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bill. And maybe one last quick question before we go to the polls in the audience. We've got an audience of innovators, entrepreneurs, startups from all over the world. What would be the biggest challenge you'd throw out to them and say, hey, you solve this and it's going to be a great opportunity for the industry and a great opportunity for you, Mr. or Mrs. or Miss Entrepreneur? Go.
Yeah, I don't think there's one thing. I think it's all those things that we talked about. It's keeping products safe and high quality. It's about our environmental initiatives, reducing our carbon footprint. Those are some of the core things, and these things around animal care and how we manage animals. And at the end of the day, the pork producer tagline that Bill talks about, it's really, it's producer led, but it's consumer focused. And that's what we got to continue to think about, and where the consumers want to go. That's where we're going to put our innovation efforts to make sure we're doing what the consumers want us to do, providing the products they want us to provide and the way they want us to provide it. I'm not sure I've got that one silver one, but think about that in terms of where you put your efforts.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. And Bill?
Well, I would say that the folks that have taken the time to get on this webinar have already demonstrated that they care and they want to solve some problems and they want to make a profit doing it, and that's great. My advice to everybody listening to this is you better get a hold of Thrive and John Hartnett. There's a reason that you saw that all those logos of all these ag companies out there. We all want to get better. We firmly believe in continuous improvement, and we know it's going to take some innovation to get us there. And the reason that we're part of the Thrive Network is so that we can connect with people. And I put another fundamental principle out there for the audience, and that's this. American agriculture and agriculture in general is global in scale. It is large. And we have the ability, because we're already here. We have the people, we have the means of production, we have the assets, and we're at scale. So if you're deciding where you want to invest or who you want to talk to, there's nothing wrong with the garage innovation. But the reality is the reason that we're engaged with Thrive is we get the entrepreneurs connected with the producers and connected with the businesses that can actually move things at scale. I think that's what I would challenge your audience, John, is get in touch with you and let's do something meaningful at scale.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill. I wasn't expecting that, but thank you very much, for that. Jess, if you could maybe just share the polls and we'll see some of the results. And Hopefully we can kind of pop those up and share them with everybody. Hopefully people can see them now. We had that first question really around, the supply chain disruptions. And I think it's like the top 30% of the audience felt the economic sustainability of farming was a big one. 27% the emotional financial well-being of pig farmers, and health and safety. So kind of between the three of them, that's where 90% of people voted. Bill, Joe, any surprises, or does that make people weren't as upset about increased pork prices, preferred to have safe people and safe plants?
I would maybe jump in, and certainly in the U.S. we've looked at, there's been a really, I would say, overall healthy discussion around how we're treating each other as citizens, right? And that's happened around the world. And when you bring that back down to agriculture, John, I think you see that reflected in here, is that ultimately there's a sense that you need to make money in order to remain in business. And so everybody in the supply chain needs to be able to be economically sustainable. And if you look at whether it's Smithfield's sustainability principles or the industries, I think they line up really nicely with taking care of our people and taking care of our animals. And being economically sustainable is a predicate to doing the other sustainability pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. What Bill said, the health crisis and the financial crisis is what we're dealing with, and that's what shows up in those polls. And that's what we got to be focused on every day. Is as we said here at Smithfield, we're trying to keep people safe and healthy and provide food. So
yeah. And the next question was around what supply chain improvements would you see are being implemented to help here, and even if it increases food costs. And I think it's pretty spread out here. I think 26% of the audience said increase use of automation and robotics on farms and in the packing plants. 20% of the audience said use of data, e.g. blockchain, to increase transparency and traceability. Bill, you'd mentioned some of this already. And 21% support research to help better understand and address supply chain disruptions. Yeah, that was the spread there. Any comments on that, gentlemen?
Yeah, I'll tell you that I don't know that that's terribly surprising either. Obviously, I think everyone's trying to work on automation and robotics, and that's going to continue. It's going to be further continued as you think about COVID-19. Traceability, transparency has been critical, and it's going to continue to be critical. And we talked a little bit about e-commerce as well, and I don't think any of those are surprising.
Okay. I know we're getting tight on time, and I want to move to the audience. I think the last question really was, COVID has accelerated certain food industry trends, but which change do you think is most likely to stick? And number one, 36% of the audience, innovation adoption throughout the supply chain. So obviously innovation. Second one there was online meal grocery orders. You mentioned that earlier as well, Joe, some of the stuff that you're seeing. And glad to see home cooking is coming in third. So I don't think there's too many surprises there from our audience.
And we found that the amount of people searching for information on how to cook, we've seen an uptick in that, and that makes sense. And so one of our jobs here is make sure that consumers have that information available electronically when they are getting ready to put together their meal. So I think that lines up with what we're doing, John.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. So maybe we'll go to some of the audience Q&A. If people can click the Q&A and you can kind of see who's asking questions. Hopefully Bill and Joe can see these questions, and I'll take the first question from Zin Lim. How much more automation can be introduced to meat processing to better protect workers and consumers? I feel that one is kind of pointed at Joe a little bit here.
Yeah, for sure. I think a tremendous amount. That activity has been going on for a very long time, especially in the last 10 years, improving our facilities, not only for the employees, but for food safety, as well as just overall efficiency. There's more to be had. And as technology continues to improve, to be able to adapt to those types of facilities, you're going to see that innovation in that area continue to grow. And COVID does nothing but continue to accentuate that or accentuate the need for that as we go forward. So, up till a few years ago, our meat facilities kind of were the same as they always have been, a lot more food safe, a lot cleaner. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of manual labor. And I think some of these newer technologies are enabling us to do things completely differently with robotics and some of these types of technologies.
Mm-hmm. Next question is from Roger Royce, who I know well in Silicon Valley. He's a great leader in the ag tech space and has helped kind of build a great innovation ecosystem here and across the world. His question is, other than natural gas conversion, what technologies are helping with hog waste and groundwater contamination? Bill, do you want to take a run of that one?
Yeah, I'll start off, and certainly Joe can speak specifically to what Smithfield's doing in that space with the digesters and the like. So I would say one thing to start as a overall predicate in this is our ability to take the nutrients from the animal, apply them back on the soil to produce the crop that then produces the feed that we then feed to the pig. It's an incredibly virtuous cycle. And frankly, it's something we've been doing in agriculture for 10,000 years, and the ability to put the nutrients from the animal back onto the land. On our farm in South Dakota, our family operation, we no longer have swine, but we do have cattle. And they're an important part of our farming system where we plant cover crops. We put the manure on the soil, and we use that to grow the grain, which then turns back and grows the cattle. It's the same principle for poultry or for pork. So I think the other thing that's important for the audience to know is that in the United States, nutrient management in the pork industry has been regulated for over 2 decades. And most people naturally assume that's some sort of an unregulated field. Well, the reality is you have to have a nutrient management plan. It's overseen by your state, Department of Environment and Natural Resources. You have to have soil tests. There's certain times of year you can apply the nutrients, and other times you're banned from doing it, except in cases of an emergency. So there's a very well-run system out here. And I think what we're finding out with our blockchain project, for example, in looking at that and being able to verify that through the system, we're finding out that we're already close to carbon neutral, and we're doing a pretty good job of managing the soil. Now, that said, there are dairy farms, hog farms, and some cattle farms now are moving in the area of methane digestion and conversion. And I'd pivot to Joe to talk a little bit about how you're managing it as a company.
Yeah, we talked a little bit before about our initiative to digest some of that hog waste and turn it into renewable energy. And that's an exciting project. And I like what Bill had to say. Hog waste has value. It has nutrient value, and not just Smithfield. I think hog producers all over the U.S. are doing a great job today of making sure that they manage that in a proper way that doesn't impact surface water or groundwater, that doesn't, that's done in under the proper regulations to do it the right way. And I think the whole industry has worked hard on that and will continue to work hard on that.
Mm-hmm. Let me just take one, possibly 2 questions. I see an anonymous attendee. I don't really like taking anonymous ones. I prefer people to put their names out there, but I'll go this time, but it'll be the last time. How does foreign ownership guarantee U.S. pork supply going forward?
How does foreign, I assume that's directed at Smithfield?
Yeah.
What was the question? How does foreign ownership
guarantee U.S. pork supply going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're owned by a holding company out of Hong Kong. Smithfield Foods is owned by a parent company, but Smithfield Foods is run by Smithfield Foods, and it's given us the ability to invest in the U.S., to create jobs in the U.S., to keep this efficient hog production model that's in the U.S. It's enabled us to continue to provide jobs and provide food for the rest of the world. So it's given us all the tools that we need to be a U.S. company and provide value for the U.S. It's our ownership based in Hong Kong has been a tremendous asset for Smithfield Foods. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. Last question is from David Mucha. Innovation in the supply chain was just voted number one opportunity to poll. Where are meaningful places to start looking at where to innovate? Bill, Joe?
Yeah, I'd start out. I think the traceability component was there in the industry. And when you get into the COVID space, there were a lot of people asking legitimate questions. If I buy food from this particular brand or this particular packing plant, is it going to be safe? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. The Food and Drug Administration spoke about that early and often. But this idea of being able to understand what's happening at the farm, but then be able to trace that all the way out to the consumer so that the consumer themselves has confidence that what they're being told on package is accurate, that there's not greenwashing going on when you're looking at your sustainability metrics. I view that as an area that the producers that I work for have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars just in the past 18 months to try to help figure that out and try to pilot some of it. Because when you really think about our supply chain, Joe, you take the food and it goes in as it disaggregates as it goes through the system. And so it can become really difficult to ascertain what farm did that come from, or how do I know what's in this package? And there's some, I would say, some things we need to think about innovating for provenance in the supply chain.
Yeah, I'd answer that question very similar. It's digital. Today everyone, because of what we're going through, everyone's a little more tech savvy. Focusing on those digital areas, whether it's understanding transparency, whether it's how we go to market in terms of marketing the new consumers and how they're dealing with things. There's a tremendous amount of innovation around digital that is going to have to continue to happen. Because that trend's so large. And I would say the second one is around robotics and automation and efficiencies inside the entire supply chain, whether that be on the hog farms or, the grain farms, all the way through to our warehouses and our grocery stores and our restaurants.
And I would add one piece on the end there. We're in the middle of, everybody's familiar with contract tracing now with COVID and people. We're in the middle of a major software development project with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, multi-million-dollar project to do contact tracing of pigs, so that if animals become ill, we can quickly determine where that's at and try to prevent the spread of disease in this nation. And so there's areas there that we're right in the middle of now that we'd be more than happy to talk to people about innovative ideas on that type of tracing.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, Bill, Joe, I really appreciate your time today. I found it a fascinating, conversation and also very kind of uplifting. I mean, we've all kind of seen the challenges of COVID and the negativity, but 55,000 people across the world employed and keeping the supply chains open was certainly no easy task, for the industry. And I think you've really demonstrated, your focus on responsibility and operational excellence and innovation, and hopefully innovation is what's going to kind of drive us forward here. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you, this morning, and looking forward to seeing you, physically one of the days here once we kind of get out of a lockdown. I also wanted to maybe thank our audience for tuning in. Some great questions. Appreciate everybody's, tuning in this morning. And maybe if I'm going to ask Jess maybe to kind of put up the next slide around or for next month, what we're going to have. And so next month, great speaker, really looking forward to having a conversation with Rob Painter, who's president and CEO of Trimble. I think everybody is very familiar with the Trimble name in technology, but obviously what they're doing in agriculture as well. And we're going to have a really good conversation around the connecting of physical and digital to transform agriculture, next month. So that's July 9th at 9 a.m. So make sure to tune in. And then finally, again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you, our audience, for being here. And I'd also like to thank our team, Jess behind the scenes and the rest of our team. Really appreciate all their help pulling all this together. And thank you to the folks at Smithfield and the National Pork Board for supporting behind the scenes for a great webinar. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in touch. Take care.
Thanks, John.